Before we lay out a single piece of evidence today, I am making a direct proclamation to you, the viewer. My name is Clifford L. Phelan, Jr. Over decades of independent research into ancient texts, forensic theology, and biological anomalies, I have operated under a strict rule: to be honest, factual, and transparent. I am here to examine the raw data of our past, not to sell you a fantasy. Right now, there is a multi-million-dollar industry on platforms like YouTube making massive amounts of money off of your curiosity. Creators are taking tiny grains of actual cuneiform history, deliberately twisting them into sci-fi narratives, or filtering them through metaphysical sales pitches. They wrap their videos in special effects and commercial hooks, all to coerce you into subscribing to newsletters, joining academies, and buying merchandise. They treat the trauma, the displacement, and the survival history of our ancestors as a product to be sold. I need to run a channel and fund this research, but I will never do it dishonestly. I will earn your support through facts, verifiable data, and unvarnished truth. Today we are going to use forensic analysis tools to expose three massive content creators who have traded historical accuracy for financial greed. We are going to dissect three specific filters: the Hollywood blockbusters claiming the Anunnaki were just space refugees mining gold nanoparticles, the theological scripts that flip the moral polarity of our oldest texts, and the New Age narratives telling you to ignore physical history in favor of, quote, vibrational activations. They lack the knowledge, or worse, they intentionally suppress it, because a managed, romanticized myth gets millions of views, while a cold, administrative crime scene forces us to confront who we really are. Once we strip away their commercial filters, we will bring in a legitimate ally: the empirical data tracking the few-second chromosome, ghost DNA, and the systemic suppression of the cuneiform archives. Let's look at the raw receipts. When you look at the content circulating out there, it's designed to look like a polished documentary. But what you are actually watching is an entertainment filter. It takes raw, ancient administrative data, twists it into sci-fi myths, and rides that wave straight to nearly 1 million views. Let's look past the hype and focus on the cold, hard, forensic reality. Take the timeline they feed you. They claim human development took a sudden magical leap 20,000 years ago, coming straight out of caves to build Göbekli Tepe. It sounds dramatic, but it's a massive chronological blunder. They are completely compressing the timeline. Göbekli Tepe doesn't date back 20,000 years. It dates back roughly 11 to 12,000 years. More importantly, by treating this as a sudden magic trick, they completely ignore the long, meticulously recorded administrative phases documented in the tablets that root this structural shift much further back in antiquity. Then there's the gold narrative. The internet loves the story that the Anunnaki came here strictly to mine nanoparticles of gold, aiming to spray them into the sky to save a dying planet. Look, resource extraction was entirely real, and archaeological findings regarding monatomic gold warrant serious, rigorous scientific investigation. But the desperate environmental refugee storyline? That's just a creative interpretation from 1976, not a direct read of the administrative tablets. When you read phases like Negabanker, it reads like a cold corporate or military deployment led by calculating managers like Inky and Enlil, who were busy building highly complex subterranean logistical networks. The hype videos also try to tell you that early humans were just helpless furry apes living in caves, easily enslaved to dig in the dirt until someone got mad and threw, quote, biblical punishments at them. They treat human origin like a careless laboratory accident. The true texts point to something far more calculated: a highly organized population relocation and management system. The Lagash tablet reveals that when conditions went south, it wasn't a supernatural lightning bolt. It was a tactical, high-grade conflict that required building intensive shelter networks, utilizing heavy engineering like the Nerua Igal rolling stone doors to protect thousands of personnel from lethal surface conditions. And finally, consider how they handle the identity of Utnapishtim. They offer a grain of truth by noting his account predates the biblical Noah by thousands of years. But then they reduce the entire event to a simple natural disaster story with a wooden boat. The deeper cuneiform records show that this cataclysm was actually the aftermath of a massive tactical fallout. The ark wasn't a simple wooden raft to float on a storm. These were highly engineered, sealed, subterranean vaults designed to protect critical genetic material and personnel from severe radiation and total environmental collapse. What we are dealing with on the internet isn't history. It's a filtered lens, and it's time we start looking at the unvarnished data. I turned on my computer and came across a video titled "The Full Story of the Anunnaki. Every spiritualist must know this." It's pulling in massive numbers. And when you look at the first half, they actually get a few things right. They hit on a massive grain of truth. The video points out that the Sumerians didn't describe their gods with spooky mystery, poetry, or metaphor. They were completely matter-of-fact, almost clinical, describing flesh and blood entities and ships of fire and thunder. And from a forensic standpoint, that is highly accurate. When you actually look at the administrative and logistical layers of the cuneiform archives, the scribes didn't write with religious mysticism. They wrote like recording clerks, military logs, and project managers. The interactions with figures like Enki and Enlil were treated as direct structural realities, not abstract theological visions. The video also hits a heavy historical fact when it talks about institutional scaffolding. It says the vertical power structures, rigid hierarchies, financial currency, and contracts we live under today were seated in the early temples of Mesopotamia as an architecture of control. That is absolutely true. The Sumerian temple complexes, the ziggurats, were the literal administrative hubs for population counting, resource tracking, and civic management. The concept of centralized banking and top-down social engineering traces its genealogy directly back to that Mesopotamian blueprint. But right around minute 14, the whole thing completely derails. The creator leaves the physical cuneiform tablets entirely behind and pivots hard into a spiritual self-help narrative. Why? To serve a marketing funnel. To keep people listening for nearly 40 minutes, the script starts flooding the zone with modern metaphysical buzzwords, manipulating frequencies, vibrational reality, and DNA activation. They act like our DNA is an empty, unprogrammed vessel just waiting for a New Age seminar to switch it on. But let's look at the actual science. The truth is, our DNA is active, but it has been heavily suppressed and programmed since we were 2 years old. When you look at the human genome, you can see where it has been genetically altered. Specifically, the fusion of 2 chromosomes together to form what we see as chromosome number 2 shows a literal physical genetic weld. That genetic weld actively suppresses capacities and abilities we may have fully possessed at one time. Releasing that weld would be an activation, unquote, of sorts. And while there may very well be a natural means to achieve that, that is exactly what I am currently analyzing. I haven't come to a definitive conclusion yet, even though my ongoing research is mapping out the potential pathways for how that liberation can happen. But these channels don't want to talk about genetic welds or biological constraints. They stop framing the Anunnaki as physical, historical administrators who left behind a real messy biological and radioactive aftermath. Instead, they turn them into spooky interdimensional architects who left behind a vibrational test. And here is the ultimate catch: the absolute disrespect for the audience. The video repeatedly urges you to join their Insights Academy, to get a free book. They are taking the genuine trauma, displacement, and survival history recorded on those ancient tablets and turning it into a corporate marketing funnel to make their own wallets fatter. They tell the viewer, "You are a creator, break the chains," which sounds incredibly empowering, but it completely detaches from the gritty clinical realities of the actual ancient events. It tells people to stop looking at history and just listen to the divine frequency within. That is a massive cop-out. It encourages people to ignore the hard physical evidence. Real research does the exact opposite. We shouldn't tell people to sit in a room and wait for a magical DNA activation. We need to point directly to the physical dirt, the engineering of the 17 rolling stone doors, the specific timeline windows, and the undeniable medical symptoms of radiation recovery. It is clear as day why these channels get millions of views. They know how to sell a mystery, but they are filtering out the real heavy data just to capitalize on the present trend. We need to treat the ancient past with the serious clinical focus it deserves, rather than turning it into a new age commercial. I've been reviewing a video called "Did the Anunnaki Create Humans, and Are We Not Supposed to Know Why?" And let me tell you, this one is an entirely different story from the clickbait fluff out there. It's sitting at a very low view count after a month, which is practically a badge of honesty on today's internet. The creator isn't chasing an algorithm. He's laying down raw clinical data. Right out of the gate in the first 3 minutes, the video establishes that the Anunnaki are not a modern conspiracy theory. They are recorded in precise physical terms in cuneiform tablets that predate Abrahamic traditions by thousands of years. They brought technology, architecture, and vertical hierarchies to ancient Mesopotamia. From a forensic standpoint, this is 100% historically sound. The Sumerian king lists and administrative tallies treat these entities as structural, physical rulers. There is no spooky theological fluff or mystical poetry in those raw ledger lines. It is written and handled like a top-down, real-world logistical operation. Then, as the video moves toward the 6-minute mark, the creator hits the exact intersection where my own research locks in. He explains that Enki engineered a primitive worker, intelligent enough to use tools, but limited so as not to become a threat. He points directly to human chromosome 2 as the smoking gun, showing that it was fused in an unnatural way that distinguishes us from primates. Mainstream genetics openly admits this discrete fusion event happened, but they refuse to call it engineering. The video is entirely correct in pointing to it, but we need to look more closely at what that actually means for activation. Many people assume we need to activate our DNA because they think we are born as an empty vessel waiting to be programmed. But the reality is, for most of us, that vessel was already completely programmed by the time we were 2 years old. Our DNA is already highly active, but it is actively suppressed. When you analyze the human genome, the fusion of those two ancient molecules together to form chromosome 2 reveals a literal physical genetic weld. That weld acts as a biological limiter, systematically shutting down capacities and perception fields that humanity once freely accessed. Releasing that weld is an activation of sorts, a physical liberation of the code. While there may be natural or environmental means to unlock that genetic weld, that is the exact boundary line of my current research. We aren't trying to fill an empty vessel. We are trying to undo a structural lockdown. The video then exposes a massive editorial shift that happened when these accounts were rewritten into the biblical narrative. It took the Sumerian records of competing factions, where Enki wanted to empower humans with knowledge, and Enlil wanted them controlled or destroyed, and collapsed them into one singular deity. Think about what that accomplished. It took a multi-faction logistical operation and turned it into a monotheistic, moral framework. By doing that, the historical records were effectively neutralized. It literally flipped the moral polarity of history, teaching billions of people to fear the very mechanism of their own cognitive liberation while worshiping the faction that wanted them kept in ignorance. And if you want to know what happened to the physical evidence of this history, the video calls out an extraordinary event from 2003 that the mainstream media completely swept under the rug. In the immediate aftermath of the invasion of Iraq, the Baghdad Museum was systematically looted. This wasn't opportunistic civilians. The storage vaults were opened with keys, and specific pre-flood cylinder seals were professionally extracted while military troops stood by. It was an operational cleanup of physical evidence. By targeting the oldest cuneiform records, they ensured that the public would remain completely dependent on a sanitized, institutional version of history. This video proves why we have to keep pushing past the sanitized narrative. The reason we aren't supposed to know our history is the same reason any controlled population is kept in the dark. Because people who understand how the system was built are far harder to keep inside it. The limitations you feel are not a personal weakness. They are a design feature. And once you understand the design, you can begin to work around it, look past the veil, and ultimately transcend the lockdown. As we bring this 5th episode to a close, I want to take a step back from the ancient tablets and speak directly to you about what you've actually been witnessing on this channel. If you have watched every episode I've produced of the Wood Wide Web from the very beginning, then you haven't just been watching a breakdown of history, you have witnessed my own evolution as a creator. When I started out on YouTube, I was a complete novice. I was learning the ropes, paying my tuition to the software, and figuring out how to navigate these incredibly complex digital tools. But today, this episode marks a definitive conclusion to that evolution. I have finally found a way to take absolute, total control over the creation of my videos. I've realized that the automated systems out there want to force creators into a box. They want to force us to use bombastic background music, dramatic jump cuts, and flash-in-the-pan special effects to manipulate your emotions and fish for views. I've made a conscious decision to reject that autopilot. From here on out, I am using my own formatting. We are establishing a more classroom-style teaching approach, focusing on raw data, historical context, and actual facts for folks who take the time to listen and view. Now, don't get me wrong, I still like special effects when they serve a purpose, and we will use clean visual text layouts to anchor our data on the screen. But what I refuse to do is use special effects or artificial visual tricks that actively lie to the viewer or bend the truth just to look cinematic. This channel isn't a Hollywood studio, and it isn't an entertainment filter. It's a classroom. Thank you for walking through this evolution with me. Now that we have total control of the cockpit, the real work begins. Stay grounded, and I'll see you in the next episode.